The clock ticked, and the courtroom door swung open, just moments before the judge's gavel came down. In stepped an unfamiliar woman, a lawyer eyes locked with the ex-wife as she approached the table. She carried only one thing, a tarnished key. The woman extended it toward the widow's trembling hands, and there it was, her name etched into the cold metal. "This is your last chance," the lawyer whispered, breaking the silence. Everyone knew what that key meant, but no one knew why it was in her hands. Sometimes the thing you lose is the one thing you needed to find. The courtroom door creaked open. It sounded too loud in the pregnant silence. All eyes turned. The judge, poised with gavel raised, held the room in quiet suspense. She stood in the doorway, slender, sharp-featured, and unfamiliar, clutching something in her hand. The ex-wife blinked, her breath catching as the woman's eyes locked with hers. The lawyer was late, but that wasn't what drew the tension. It was what she held. The key, a tarnished old thing, worn smooth with age, her name etched deeply into the brass. It gleamed dully in the light of the courtroom, a flash of silver in the stillness. No one moved. The ex-wife's pulse raced, her fingers twitching, though she didn't dare reach for it. It seemed in that moment, the key held everything, every secret she'd buried in her heart, every unspoken word in her marriage, every twisted reason she'd left him. The key was a promise and a threat. Its presence in the lawyer's hand screamed of truth she wasn't ready to hear, of a past that could never stay buried. The woman stepped forward, each stride measured, controlled. She extended her hand toward the ex-wife, and in the trembling silence, the key was passed between them, as if the entire courtroom held its breath. "This is your last chance," the lawyer whispered, the words barely a murmur, yet they stung the air. The ex-wife's hand shook violently as she grasped the key. Her knuckles were white with the effort to keep steady, the metal cold against her skin, an anchor to a past she'd spent years trying to forget. She glanced down, her chest tight as she traced the letters of her name engraved on the surface. Why had he kept it? Why hadn't he told her? The lawyer's gaze never wavered. There was no malice in her expression, but something almost imperceptible lingered in her eyes, a flicker of doubt or hesitation, just long enough to make the ex-wife wonder if she, too, was carrying a secret. The silence stretched. Every corner of the room felt heavy, as if the walls themselves had become witnesses. The ex-wife's heart drummed in her ears as memories began to rise like ghosts in the courtroom. Clawing at the edges of her thoughts, her mind wandered back. The scent of his cologne, clinging to his jacket as he left for the last time. The way his words always seemed so rehearsed, too perfect to be real. The key had been in his hands all those years. But it was never meant for her. It was never hers to find. She had trusted him with everything, her heart, her future, and still, there had been things left hidden from her. He had lied about so many things, but this was something worse. This was something deeper than any betrayal she had felt. She stared at the key, the dull weight of it suddenly unbearable. The thoughts she'd shut out for so long came rushing back. Her father's broken promises, her mother's quiet surrender. Her parents' marriage, too, had ended in the silence of secrets. Had she unknowingly stepped into the same pattern? "What does this mean?" Her voice broke the silence, quiet but firm. She spoke not to the lawyer, but to herself, as if trying to understand what was happening to her, to the life she'd built on a lie. The lawyer didn't answer immediately, her eyes softening for the first time. "It means you can choose to open it," she said, her voice low, "or you can let it go." 1,000 thoughts collided in the ex-wife's mind, too many to process. The courtroom, the weight of the key, the unanswered question lingering between them. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't. The room spun in slow motion as she glanced at the lawyer, searching for any sign of a crack in her calm demeanor. She wanted the truth, but was it worth the cost? What would she uncover if she turned that key? But the longer she held it, the more it seemed to burn her skin. The key, a piece of the man she had once loved, felt like a prison. She hadn't asked for this. She had left him, moved on, rebuilt her life. Yet here she was, in a courtroom, holding the final piece of a puzzle she never intended to complete. Her hand trembled again, and she looked at the lawyer once more. Was there compassion in her eyes, or was it just another lie? The ex-wife's chest tightened. She knew the answer before she asked the question, but she asked anyway. "Why are you giving this to me?" The lawyer's gaze faltered, her composed exterior slipping for just a moment. The ex-wife caught it, the hint of guilt, the flicker of a deeper pain, a wound, raw and barely healed. Her eyes narrowed. "I wasn't supposed to, you know. But sometimes you have to give people a choice." The words were careful, deliberate. But beneath them, there was a truth that hovered between them. Unspoken. It hit her then. This wasn't just about the past. It wasn't just about the divorce, the broken promises, or the betrayal. This was about freedom. It was about her choosing what to do with the hurt, what to do with the pieces of herself she had left behind. The lawyer paused, then stepped back, giving her space. Her eyes never left the ex-wife's face, and in them, there was something more than just the cold professionalism of a lawyer. There was something human, a flicker of fear. Was she afraid of what the key would unlock? Or afraid of what would happen if the ex-wife chose to leave the past behind? Time slowed, each breath a painful reminder of the years spent in the shadow of things left unsaid. The ex-wife's mind raced as she looked down at the key, feeling its weight grow heavier with each passing second. Was she ready? Could she finally unlock the truth? Or would she lock it away once again, and live in the darkness of her own making? The courtroom, the lawyer, the key, everything felt so far away, as if the air itself had thickened and the truth was suffocating. A question lingered, an echo of the past, relentless and unyielding. The ex-wife's fingers clenched tighter on the key, her breath shallow, her pulse thundering in her ears. She didn't have an answer. Not yet, but she would. Why was this key kept from me for so long? It's the things we lock away that eventually unlock us. The silence of the house felt thick, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the years of unsaid words. The key in her hand weighed heavier with every second, and the air seemed to press in around her, suffocating as she stood there in the dimly lit hallway. The house hadn't changed since he'd left, not really. Some things, like the pictures on the wall or the scent of the old wood, stayed frozen in time, echoes of a life once shared. But some things had changed. She had changed. She didn't want to be here, didn't want to look at the rooms that held her memories like ghosts, locked away in drawers and cupboards, each one a chapter she had buried too deep to revisit. But the key had forced her to return, to open the door she'd kept shut for so long. With a steady breath, she walked past the familiar rooms, down the narrow hallway that led to his study, the place where they'd spent hours planning their future, where his laughter had filled the space until it no longer did. The study still smelled faintly of his cologne, a sharp, expensive scent that had never quite faded. She stopped in front of the desk, her hand tightening around the key. She'd known the desk well, had watched him shove papers and promises into its drawers, watched him lock them away from her, and now the key seemed to mock her for not having questioned him sooner. She didn't want to open it. She could feel the weight of his secrets bearing down on her. But she couldn't let go of the key. The desk was large, dark wood with intricate carvings. His study had always been a place of order. Everything in its right place, his place, his control. She touched the drawer that she knew he kept locked. For years, it had been off-limits, a forbidden space. A place she never dared to look because she had trusted him. And what was worse than knowing you were trusting someone who could lie to you so easily? Her fingers brushed the cold metal of the keyhole. For a moment, she hesitated, the memory of his cold smile flashing in her mind. He had always been like this, never showing all of himself, always keeping something just out of reach. The key was a way for him to hold power even when he was gone. She slid the key into the lock. The click of the drawer opening was louder than she expected, and it sent a jolt through her chest. Inside, there were only a few papers, mostly old bills and some receipts. But in the corner of the drawer, something caught her eye. It was a photograph, folded and creased, with edges that had yellowed with time. She picked it up, unfolding it. Slowly, her breath catching as she saw what it was. It was her. From years ago, standing on a beach, the sunlight hitting her hair just right. But something was wrong. There, next to her, standing just a little too close, was a woman she didn't recognize. The woman's face was partially obscured, but the look in her eyes, it was the same look he had given her when he'd left. The same look that said there were things she'd never be told. The photo was older than she remembered, older than their marriage. The key, his last message to her, had led her here. To this. She turned the photo over. There was a name written on the back, in his familiar scrawl. A name she didn't know. A name she didn't want to know. Her heart pounded in her chest, the sound deafening in the quiet room. Her fingers trembled as she held the photo, a mixture of anger and hurt flooding her. But beneath it, something deeper, a sense of betrayal, sharp and searing. She had always known he was hiding something from her. But this was more than she had ever imagined. Her fingers gripped the photo, so tightly that it started to tear at the edges. She slammed it down onto the desk, but even as she did, she couldn't look away from the image. The woman's face haunted her, burned into her mind. She was no longer just a stranger. She was a part of their story, a part of their past that he had never shared with her. She turned back to the drawer, her breath coming faster now. She dug through the papers, pulling them out one by one, searching for answers, but finding only more silence. And then, buried beneath the pile of receipts, she found a letter. It was old, yellowed with time, but there was something about it that stopped her. Something about the way it was tucked away so carefully. She opened it, and the words spilled out in his familiar handwriting. But they weren't to her. The letter was addressed to the woman in the photo. Her hands went cold. The letter was dated 2 months before their wedding, and it spoke of a life they had planned to share, a future that hadn't been hers. It spoke of love, of promises, of secrets kept hidden. It was the story of the life he had given to someone else, a life she had never known existed. She read the words over and over again, each sentence tightening the grip of betrayal in her chest. She had known he was distant, but she had never known how deep the distance went. She had never known how much of their life had been built on lies. She stared at the letter, her vision blurring, and in that moment, she knew he had given her everything. But the truth, and she had given him everything she had. The weight of it crashed down on her, and for the first time, she understood what it felt like to be small. The woman in the photo, the letters, the betrayal, it all weighed too heavily on her, too suffocating to bear. She dropped the letter onto the desk, her hands shaking. She stood there for a moment, staring at the papers, the photo, the key. The silence in the room felt deafening, and in that silence, she realized something. It wasn't just him she was angry with. It was herself for not seeing what was right. In front of her. She turned away from the desk, the echo of her footsteps the only sound in the room. She walked out of the study, feeling the weight of the key in her hand, heavier than ever. But the question lingered. The one question that would haunt her for as long as she lived. What did he do with the one thing I truly loved? The most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. The house was too quiet, too still. She could feel it in the air, the weight of everything that had been left unsaid, the silence that now filled the spaces between them. The walls, once alive with laughter and promises, now seemed hollow. She stood in the middle of the living room, the sunlight casting long shadows across the hardwood floor, and for a moment, She felt like a stranger in her own life. She hadn't expected to come back here, not after everything. But the key had forced her hand, had dug up the past like a buried wound that refused to heal. She felt a strange pull, an unease that gnawed at her, drawing her back into the memories she had left behind. Her fingers brushed the edges of the photo album on the coffee table, and she stopped, her breath catching. She hesitated, the old wounds reopening with each second that passed. She hadn't opened this album in years. It felt wrong, like opening a door that should never have been touched. But now, the question of why she had been kept in the dark, why she had trusted him, seemed to hang over her, suffocating her in the stillness of the room. With a reluctant sigh, she picked up the album and opened it to the first page. The photo of their wedding day stared back at her, young and hopeful, two people who had sworn to spend forever together. But looking at it now, she saw the cracks she hadn't noticed before. The way he wasn't really looking at her in the photo, or how his smile didn't reach his eyes. The memory of that day, once so full of promise, now felt like a lie. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. There were memories of vacations, birthdays, and anniversaries, moments she had cherished but now felt distant. She lingered on a picture of the two of them at the beach, their arms around each other, laughing. The photo was still beautiful, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't real, that something had always been missing, something she hadn't seen. She had been blind to it then. Blind to the lies. Her chest tightened as she turned. Another page, and there it was, a small folded envelope tucked between the pages, its edges worn. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know why she hadn't noticed it before. The envelope was addressed to her, written in his handwriting. She knew the handwriting well, the looping letters that had once comforted her, that had once been a symbol of everything they shared. But now it seemed foreign, ominous. She pulled the envelope out, the paper thin and fragile between her fingers, and slowly opened it. Inside was a letter. A simple one, but its words shook her to the core. She read it in silence, the words sinking in slowly, each sentence a blade to her heart. The letter was from him, written just days before their wedding. She had never seen it before. She had never even known it existed. "To the woman I love," it began, but the words that followed made her stomach churn. It wasn't a love letter. It was a confession that shook the very foundation of everything she had believed. He spoke of a relationship with another woman, someone he had been seeing for months before their wedding, someone who had never meant to leave his life. The words on the paper were cold, detached, as if he had already decided everything before they even exchanged vows. She felt the room closing in on her, the walls pressing in as her mind raced. How could she have been so blind? How could she not have seen the signs? How could he have looked her in the eyes and lied so easily? The pain of the betrayal hit her in waves, each wave stronger than the last, crashing over her, pulling her under. Her fingers tightened around the letter, crumpling it in her grip. The weight of the lie, the depth of the betrayal, crushed her. She hadn't just been lied to, she had been chosen, used, a pawn in his game. And the woman in the letter, the woman who had been there all along, had known the truth. She had known about her, about everything. And still, she had chosen to stay silent, to let her believe in something that had never existed. The letter wasn't the only thing hidden in the album. She flipped the page again, and there, tucked into the corner, was a small folded receipt, yellowed with age. It was from a hotel. A date and a name she didn't recognize. She ran her thumb over it, feeling the slick texture of the paper, and something inside her twisted. She knew what it was before she even had to read it. The hotel, the date, they matched the days when she had been away, the days when she thought everything was fine, the days when he had been with someone else. Her hands shook as she looked at the receipt, her thoughts spiraling. She had been so sure of him, so sure of their life together. But he had lied to her, not just once but over and over again. And now the truth was unfolding in front of her, piece by piece, like the slow unraveling of a life she had built on sand. But there was something else, something darker lurking behind the lies. The lawyer, the key. She had thought the key was just a symbol of betrayal, but now she realized it was something more. It was the link between everything, the tie that bound the past to the present. The lawyer's role in all of this had never been clear. But now, the more she thought about it, the more she wondered how much the lawyer had known, how much they had been complicit in. Her hands gripped the album harder, her mind racing. What did the lawyer promise him? What part had they played in all of this? Had they known about the affair? Had they been keeping secrets for him all along, watching as her world fell apart, as she was kept in the dark? The silence in the room seemed to stretch, pressing down on her, suffocating her as the truth twisted around her chest like a vice. She had to know. She had to confront the liar, had to ask her why she had been part of the lie, part of the deception. Was she always in on it? Had the lawyer known everything and chosen to stand by him anyway? Or had they been as blind as she had been, as complicit in the betrayal as he had been? The questions pressed in on her, suffocating, relentless. The room seemed to shrink around her, the weight of the lies crushing her, until there was nothing left but the truth. And the truth was unbearable. She stood there in the quiet, the album heavy in her hands, the past unraveling before her, and for the first time she understood. She understood what had been taken from her, what had been stolen in the name of love, and she understood, too, that the past would never let her go. She placed the album down, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the edges of the photo. And as she turned to leave the room, the question lingered, a bitter taste in her mouth. What had he promised her? Children are the unwitting pawns in wars they never started. The kitchen was quiet, save for the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, cold now, but it reminded her of mornings when things felt right, when the world outside hadn't fractured, and when the laughter of her child filled the spaces between them. But now the house felt different. The walls seemed to close in, the light too sharp, too harsh. She stood by the window, staring out at the yard, but her mind wasn't really there. It was somewhere else, far away, tangled in the threads of her past, in the spaces between memories. Her fingers rested lightly on the windowsill, the coolness of the glass grounding her. Behind her, the sound of small footsteps grew closer. She didn't turn, but she knew who it was. Her child. Their footsteps had always sounded the same, light, quick, almost skipping, as if they could outrun the world. "Mom?" The voice was small, hesitant, unsure. It made her chest tighten, a lump forming in her throat. She took a deep breath and turned, forcing a smile that she knew didn't quite reach her eyes. Her child stood in the doorway, clutching a worn teddy bear in their hands. Their eyes, wide and searching, locked onto hers, full of something that hadn't been there before. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice too soft, too tender, as if asking. The question might shatter something fragile between them. Her child hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Why do you and Dad fight?" The question hung in the air, sharp and raw. Her heart stuttered, her thoughts racing. How could she explain it? How could she put words to the wreckage of their lives? "Sweetheart," she started, but her words faltered, slipping away from her like water through her fingers. She looked at her child, so small, so innocent, and wondered if they could ever truly understand. Would they have to carry the weight of her mistakes, of their father's mistakes, in their own way? She knelt down, her knees creaking under her weight, and reached for her child's hand. The teddy bear was soft, its fur worn thin, the eyes barely visible now. She had bought it for them years ago, on a quiet afternoon when everything had felt simple and full of promise. It was a reminder of better days, days when they had still believed in magic, in comfort, in something unbreakable. "Mom and Dad have had some problems," she said, trying to make her voice sound reassuring. But even she could hear the lie in her tone. "It's not your fault, okay? Sometimes grown-ups don't know how to fix things, but you ... You don't have to worry about that. You're safe." Her child's grip tightened around the teddy bear, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of confusion in their eyes, something dark and unfamiliar that hadn't been there before. Her child had always been full of light, a spark that could warm even the coldest corners of her heart. But now, there was something shadowed behind their gaze, something that was growing too fast. The past few weeks had been a blur, conversations held in hushed tones, the distance between her and her ex-husband becoming an unbridgeable chasm. The lies had piled up, and each one seemed to sink deeper into the foundation of their family, breaking it apart from the inside. But she had never realized until now how much of that destruction had been passed down to their child. "Do you remember when Dad used to read to you at night?" she asked, her voice quiet. "The stories about pirates and treasure?" Her child nodded, but their eyes didn't shine like they used to when they spoke about those nights. There was no excitement. No wonder, just silence. "You miss him," she said, more to herself than to her child. "I know you do." A tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She didn't have the energy to. "I want things to be like they were," her child whispered, their voice barely audible. "I want you and Dad to be happy again." Her heart broke at the words. She wanted that too, more than anything. She wanted to go back to a time when love was easy, when they were a family, when the world hadn't turned upside down. But that world didn't exist anymore. It had been torn apart, piece by piece, by secrets, by lies, by betrayals they had both been too afraid to confront. She cupped her child's face in her hands, pressing her forehead to theirs. The warmth of their skin, so innocent and untainted, made the pain in her chest ache deeper. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if the apology was for them or for herself. "I'm so sorry." Her child pulled away slightly, their small hand reaching up to touch the scar on her cheek, something that had faded over time, but never completely gone. It was a reminder of another time, a different kind of hurt, one that she had buried. "Deep, does it still hurt?" her child asked, their voice trembling. The scar. The reminder of the way she had been hurt, the way she had allowed herself to be broken. But the scar was just a symbol now, something that had healed in its own way, even if the wound had never fully closed. "No," she said softly. "It doesn't hurt anymore." But the truth was, it did hurt. It hurt in ways she couldn't explain, hurt in ways that weren't just about the past, but about the future. What would she do when this all came out? When the truth finally surfaced, when the walls they had built came crashing down, what would her child do? Her child's innocence had been the only thing she had left to cling to, the one thing that hadn't been broken by the lies. But even that, she realized, was fading. Her child had seen too much, heard too much, asked too many questions. They were caught in the middle of a storm they didn't understand, but they felt its pull all the same. The more she tried to protect them, the more she realized how impossible it was. The damage had already been done. Her child stepped back, eyes wide, and she could see the quiet fear behind their gaze. They were already starting to understand. She stood slowly, wiping her eyes, her heart heavy. She couldn't shield them from this, no matter how much she wanted to. The truth was coming, and nothing could stop it now. The silence in the room deepened, and the weight of her child's gaze pressed down on her like a suffocating fog. "What will I do when the truth finally comes out?" she asked quietly, her voice breaking the stillness, but she didn't have an answer. And in that silence, she realized neither did her child. In the end, what's mine is never truly mine. The house was quiet again, but the silence felt heavier now. The key was still in her hand, the weight of it pressing against her palm as if it were something far more than just metal. She had always thought of her life as something she owned, something she had fought for. But as the echoes of their past collided with the present, she was beginning to realize how little of it had ever truly been hers. She stood at the foot of the stairs, looking up toward the rooms above her. The air felt thick, like the house was, holding its breath, waiting for her to make the next move. Her thoughts lingered on the key that had unlocked so many buried secrets. The key that had dragged her back into a world she had tried to leave behind. She had spent the last few days piecing together the fragments of her broken life, but now the key had led her here back to the old family safe, the one her ex-husband had locked away. She didn't know why, but she had to see what was inside. She had to understand. The stairs creaked under her feet as she climbed toward the study, the room where they had once made plans, where their future had seemed so clear. Now it felt like a relic, a tomb to a life that never was. She hesitated before the safe, her hand hovering over the dial. Her heart beat faster, the weight of the moment suffocating her. She didn't want to open it. She didn't want to know. But the truth had already begun to seep out, and there was no stopping it now. With a deep breath, she turned the dial, the sound of it filling the room like a drumbeat. It clicked open with a faint groan, and the door swung open with a slow, deliberate motion, revealing the contents inside. Papers, documents, nothing too unusual. But then her eyes landed on a small, worn box, tucked neatly in the corner. She reached for it, her fingers trembling as she lifted the box from its resting place. It was heavier than she expected, its surface scratched and chipped, as if it had been handled more times than it should have been. She stared at it for a moment, unsure of what to do. But something about it called to her, something she couldn't ignore. The box opened with a soft creak, revealing a set of documents and a faded envelope, sealed with wax. Her breath caught as she pulled out the envelope, her name written across it in her ex-husband's handwriting. She didn't want to open it, but she had to. She tore the seal, her heart racing in her chest, and unfolded the letter. The words on the page were simple, but they carried a weight that threatened to crush her. The letter was from him, written just days before everything had fallen apart, but it wasn't a letter to her. It was addressed to their child. In the letter, he spoke of a trust that had been set up for their child's future money. Property, everything he had promised her, but hidden away, a secret kept between him and the lawyer. There was a clause, one that she had never known about, one that would pass everything to their child when they turned 18. But the price of this inheritance wasn't wealth, it was their silence. As she read the words, her head began to spin. She had never known. All these years, she had thought everything was for them, for their family. But now she realized the inheritance wasn't meant for her. It was meant for their child. A hidden fortune locked away by promises he had never kept. The lawyer had been a part of this, part of the betrayal. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the truth sinking into her chest. She had been kept in the dark for so long, but now the light was too bright, too harsh. Everything she had thought she knew was crumbling around her. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hall, and she quickly shoved the letter back into the box, the weight of it pressing against her chest. Her child stood in the doorway, looking at her with eyes that were too knowing, too wise for their age. "What's wrong, Mom?" The question came softly, like a thread being pulled through her heart. She looked at her child, the one thing in this world that had remained pure, untouched by the lies, the one thing that had kept her tethered to something real. But even they couldn't escape this. They couldn't escape what had been done. "Nothing," she said, her voice strained. She didn't know how to explain this, didn't know how to make sense of it. How could she? How could she tell her child that their future had been bartered, sold to the highest bidder in a game they didn't even know they were playing? Her child took a few steps closer, their small hand reaching for hers. The innocence in their eyes broke her heart all over again. "Are you sad?" they asked. She felt the lump in her throat, the weight of everything pressing down on her. "I'm just tired, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Tired of all the secrets." Her child nodded, not fully understanding, but somehow sensing that there was something wrong, something they couldn't fix. "You and Dad used to laugh," they said, their voice quiet, "when we were happy." She swallowed hard, trying to hold back the tears. "I know," she whispered. "I know." The silence between them grew heavy, suffocating. The weight of the secret that had been kept, the inheritance that wasn't meant for her, the trust that had been built on lies, it all hung between them now. A shadow that neither of them could outrun. Her child looked up at her, their eyes wide with something that looked like hope. "Maybe it will get better, right?" They asked as if asking for reassurance, for something to hold on to. She didn't know how to answer. How could she? The truth was ugly, and it was already too late for them to escape it. As she looked at her child, the tears she had been holding back finally fell, soft and silent, the only sound in the room. "What was my ex-husband hiding, and why does it all fall on me?" She whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. But the answer was already clear, echoing through her mind like a deafening drumbeat. The inheritance, the lies, the betrayals, everything was now her burden to bear, and she wasn't sure she could carry it for much longer. No one enters a battle without a reason, especially when they know they will lose. The office was colder than she remembered. The smell of old paper and coffee lingered, but it was muted now, as though the life had been sucked out of the room. She stood by the door, her fingers brushing the cool metal of the handle, her heart hammering in her chest. Every inch of her wanted to turn away, to walk out and leave the mess behind. But the key, that same cursed key, pressed against her palm, forcing her forward. She stepped inside, the sound of her shoes clicking against the floor too loud in the silence. The walls were lined with bookshelves, the corners of the room filled with piles of legal papers. The very air seemed to hum with the weight of secrets that had once been buried, hidden in the recesses of trust and silence. But the silence no longer felt safe. It felt like a warning. The lawyer's desk was immaculate, as if nothing had ever been touched. But the chair behind it, where she had once sat with the lawyer discussing divorce papers, negotiations, felt like it had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her to come and uncover the truth that had been kept from her. The lawyer wasn't there yet. The room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. She wandered toward the desk, her fingers hovering over the stack of papers. Her eyes traced the familiar paperwork, drafts, documents, signatures. All of it was part of the life that had been torn apart. But then she saw something else, tucked away beneath the pile. A small envelope. Her hand froze over it. It wasn't the first time she had seen this envelope. No, it was the same envelope she had seen once before, sitting innocently on the lawyer's desk. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't just an object from the past. It was the key to unlocking something more. Her fingers shook as she reached for it, pulling it from its hiding place. The envelope was sealed with red wax, the impression of the lawyer's personal insignia embedded in it, just like the first time. She had never thought to open it before, never realized how much had been hidden behind those sealed words. She broke the seal, unfolding the letter inside. The words were short, but they held a weight that pressed down on her chest. They were written by the lawyer herself. "You've asked the right questions, but you've come too late," the letter began. "The truth was never meant for you, but you were always meant to know. The choice was yours to make, just as the choice is his to hide." Her pulse quickened as the realization began to settle. The lawyer had known everything. She had been part of the web of deceit, playing her role in a story she hadn't even known she was part of. She hadn't been just an innocent bystander. No, she had been a player in the game, a piece of the puzzle, and now she understood why she had been kept in the dark. But that wasn't all. The letter continued, and as she read the words, her heart sank deeper into the pit of her stomach. The inheritance meant for your child was never intended for you. It was a bargain, a price to pay. His legacy was always meant to be passed on, but not in the way you thought. The words blurred in front of her, but the meaning was clear. The inheritance, the wealth, the house, the life they had built together had never been hers to keep. It had been for their child, but there was more to it. There was a price attached, a cost that had never been paid. And now she was caught. In the middle of it, the letter was signed by the lawyer, but it wasn't just a letter. It was a confession, a betrayal, a map to the lies that had torn her life apart. She dropped the letter on the desk, her hands trembling, and backed away. The air in the room felt suffocating now, the walls closing in around her as the weight of the truth pressed down harder and harder. She thought she had been prepared for this moment, but now that she had the answers, all she felt was emptiness. The truth didn't make things better. It made everything worse. As her mind raced, trying to process the implications of what she had just uncovered, she heard the door click behind her. She spun around, her heart racing, and saw the lawyer standing there, framed in the doorway. The lawyer's expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of hesitation, of fear. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Just stood there, watching the woman she had once trusted. Then finally she spoke. "I didn't want it to end like this," the lawyer said, her voice soft, almost apologetic. "I didn't want you to know. But you were always going to find out. Eventually. He made sure of it. He left you a choice, but the choice was never really yours." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't the answer she had been looking for, but it was the truth, the hard, brutal truth. You were never meant to know the full story, the lawyer continued, her voice cracking slightly. But you've always had a right to it. You were never just his wife. You were part of this too. Your pain, your betrayal, was his doing as much as it was mine. Her eyes softened for a moment, as if the weight of what she had done, of the part she had played, was finally starting to show. There was a flicker of humanity behind the lawyer's cold exterior, a glimpse of the fear that had driven her all along. "But the price of silence," the lawyer whispered, "is something no one can pay." The room felt colder now, the shadows growing longer as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. She had trusted the lawyer once, but now she saw her for what she truly was, a participant in a game that had been played long before she ever stepped into this world. Her mind was a blur, the anger rising in her chest as she faced the woman who had lied to her, who had helped tear her life apart. The truth was here now, raw and unrelenting, and there was no running from it. Who else is involved, and what's the price of silence? She asked, her voice hoarse but determined. But the lawyer didn't answer. She just stood there, her eyes lowered, as if the truth had already spoken for them both. And in that moment, the answer didn't matter anymore. The silence that had once held them all together now fractured, leaving nothing but the cold reality of what had been done and what could never be undone. We carry the past like an anchor, no matter how far we run. The sound of the rain was soft at first, a rhythmic tapping against the window pane that soon became a steady hum, filling the silence in the room. She stood there, looking out at the garden, her eyes tracing the pattern of droplets running down the glass. The world outside felt distant, muted by the grayness that had settled in the sky. Inside, it was just her and the memories, the key still set on the table in front of her, its cold surface reflecting the dim light from the lamp. She had been staring at it for what felt like hours. The same key that had led her back here, back to this house, to this life she had tried so desperately to escape. The same key that had unlocked all the things she had never wanted to know. She picked it up again, turning it over in her hand. The metal was smooth, worn from years of use, yet still sharp enough to remind her of what it had uncovered: the lies, the betrayals, the years spent living in ignorance. She had thought she knew him, thought she understood him. But as the pieces of his past started to fall into place, she realized how little she had truly understood. Her fingers lingered on the key, and her thoughts drifted back to the time before everything had shattered. The days when they had still been a family, when everything had seemed so simple. There was a sound behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Her child stood in the doorway, watching her quietly, their small hands wrapped around the teddy bear they still carried with them everywhere. "Are you okay, Mom?" The voice was soft, tentative. She closed her eyes, willing herself to hold back the wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice trembled. She had said those words 100 times before, but now they felt hollow. Her child had no idea how broken she was, how the foundation of everything she had believed in was crumbling beneath her. The lies, the secrets, the hidden truths that she had never asked for, they were all out in the open now. And she didn't know how to shield her child from the damage. Her fingers tightened around the key as she set it back on the table. "Mom," her child said again, their voice breaking through her thoughts. "Why does it feel like you're carrying something heavy?" The question stung, but it was the truth. She was carrying the weight of everything, the weight of the past, the weight of her choices, the weight of everything she had tried to bury. And now it was all spilling out, one secret at a time. "I'm carrying something I didn't expect to find," she whispered, looking down at the key once more. The words felt like a confession. She hadn't meant to come here, hadn't meant to face the truth. But now that she had, she could no longer pretend. She turned to face her child, kneeling down so that she was at their level. They still had that same look in their eyes, the one that she had seen when they were younger, a look of innocence, of hope, of trust. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry for not protecting you from this. But the truth sometimes, it comes at a price, and it's something we have to face, even if we don't want to." Her child's brow furrowed in confusion, but they nodded, as if they understood, or at least wanted to. "I don't want you to carry this weight alone," her child said, their voice soft but sincere. "We're in this together, right?" Her heart clenched at the words. "Yes," she whispered, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. "We're in this together." But the truth had already seeped into their lives, no matter how much she tried to protect them. The past was never truly gone, and no matter how far they ran, the echoes of it would always follow them. The lies her ex-husband had kept hidden, the things she had never known, were now part of their story, and as much as she wanted to shield her child from it, she knew she couldn't. The sound of the rain outside grew louder, and she felt the weight of it pressing down on her chest, heavy with the burden of everything that had come before. Her child's small hand reached for hers, and she squeezed it tightly, grounding herself in that moment. But her mind kept drifting back to him, to the man who had once promised her everything, who had once sworn to love her. But in the end, he had left her with nothing but a broken heart and unanswered questions. Her thoughts swirled as the rain continued to fall, each drop a reminder of the past she couldn't escape. The silence between them grew, not uncomfortable, but full of the unspoken truths neither of them wanted to face. The key, the inheritance, the lawyer, everything was tangled up in a web she hadn't wanted to unravel. But now that it was all laid bare, she could see the pattern, see how it all connected. Her ex-husband's childhood, the generational trauma that had shaped him, the lies he had carried for years, all of it had come to a head, and she was left to pick up the pieces. Her fingers grazed the edge of the key again, but this time, the weight felt different. It wasn't just the weight of betrayal. It was the weight of understanding that she had tried to move on, tried to build a life that was hers, but the past never stayed buried for long. It always found its way back to the surface, and when it did, it dragged everything with it. Her child's hand squeezed hers once more, pulling her back to the present. They didn't understand everything, and she wasn't sure she could explain it to them. But in that moment, she realized that perhaps the key to healing wasn't just in the truth. It was in learning to live with it, to accept the weight of it without letting it break them. Is understanding the same as forgiveness? She whispered to herself, the question hanging in the air. She didn't know the answer. Not yet. But she would have to find out, because the past had come for them, and there was no running from it now. She looked at her child one last time, their face still full of innocence, and she made a promise to herself. She would protect them from the darkness, even if it meant facing the shadows herself. The past had shaped them, yes, but it would not define them. And for the first time, she felt the weight of the truth, not as a burden, but as a release. It was a quiet victory, but a victory nonetheless. The rain outside stopped, and in the silence that followed, she found a strange kind of peace. Sometimes silence speaks louder than the truth ever could. The courtroom was suffocating. The air felt thick with anticipation, as if every word spoken, every movement made, would be the last before the world fell apart. She sat at the edge of the bench, her fingers gripping the seat in front of her, her knuckles pale, the edges of her nails digging into the wood. The sound of her heartbeat echoed in her ears, a dull thump that seemed to reverberate through the room. She was trying not to breathe too loudly, trying to keep herself together, but everything inside her was trembling. Her ex-husband sat across the room, his face impassive, unreadable. He was a man of many faces, some of which she had loved, some of which she had feared. But today, his face was cold, distant. There was no hint of the man she had once known. Only the shadow of the man he had become. The lawyer, too, was there. The woman who had once seemed like nothing more than an ally, a professional, someone whose presence was meant to help. But now she was something else entirely, a symbol of betrayal, a reminder that no one in this room had been on her side. No one had told her the truth. No one had warned her that the game was rigged, that the rules had been set before she even stepped foot in this courtroom. She turned her gaze to the lawyer, who sat at the opposite table, her face calm, composed. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of guilt, of fear that betrayed her. For all her carefully crafted defenses, the lawyer wasn't as untouchable as she appeared. Behind her professional exterior, there was a human being, one who had made choices, one who had lived with consequences. The question was, how much of the truth had she kept hidden? How much of the past was buried in her hands? The judge's gavel echoed through the room, cutting through the thick silence. The trial was about to begin. The weight of the moment pressed in on her chest, and she forced herself to breathe. The words she had rehearsed for so long seemed to have abandoned her. She had come here seeking justice, seeking answers. But now that the time had come, all she could feel was the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. Her lawyer, a man she barely knew, whispered something to her, something about presenting the evidence, about making her case. But it didn't matter. The evidence wasn't the point anymore. This was about something deeper, something buried beneath all the lies. The lawyer stood up, her voice steady as she addressed the court, her every word calculated, measured. But it was the way she glanced at the ex-husband, the subtle shift in her posture, that caught the ex-wife's attention. There was something between them, something unspoken, something that no one else in the room seemed to notice. A glance, a flicker of recognition. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, her voice cutting through the murmur in the room. "We have presented our case, and we stand by the evidence. The inheritance was never meant to be contested. The terms were clear from the beginning." The ex-wife's stomach churned. Inheritance. The words felt hollow now, meaningless. She had thought it was about money, about securing her child's future. But now she realized it was about power, it was about control. It was about a game that had been played long before she had any idea it existed. The lawyer paused, glancing down at a set of papers before her. "And as for the matter of the will," she continued, her voice unwavering, "there were instructions left, clear instructions. It was the final wish of the deceased that these matters be handled with discretion." Her eyes flicked up toward the ex-wife. There it was again, a slight shift in her gaze, a subtle tightening of her jaw. The truth was in those eyes, but it was buried too deep for anyone else to see. The ex-wife had seen enough lies to recognize them, even when they were carefully hidden behind a veil of professionalism. Her hand clenched into a fist beneath the table. The silence between them felt deafening now, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. Not yet, not until the right moment. The judge nodded, signaling for the lawyer to continue. But before the lawyer could say another word, the ex-husband's lawyer turned to face her, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something real in her eyes. Fear. A vulnerability. That hadn't been there before. The ex-wife's mind flashed back to the moment she had first met the lawyer, back when everything seemed like it was going to be easy, when the promises of fairness and resolution had seemed so tangible. But now, it all felt like a lie. And the truth, she realized, was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The room seemed to tilt, the words of the lawyer blurring into the background. Her heart raced. She could feel the weight of the secret pressing in on her chest. The pressure of knowing something she wasn't supposed to know. The lawyer's role, the ex-husband's role, it was all starting to come together, but not in the way she had expected. The judge spoke again, but the ex-wife barely heard him. Her mind was elsewhere, racing through the tangled web of the past, trying to make sense of it. She had trusted these people, had put her faith in them. And now she was left with nothing but the truth of their betrayal. The silence stretched out, an agonizing pause, before the ex-husband's lawyer turned to face her once more. There was something almost pitying in her gaze now. "You've asked for justice," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "But justice isn't always what we think it is. Sometimes the truth is a far more dangerous thing." Her words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. The ex-wife felt the ground beneath her shift, as if the very foundation of everything she had built was crumbling beneath her feet. She had been wrong all along. The answers she had been seeking weren't what she had expected. And the truth, when it came, would be far more costly than she had ever imagined. Her ex-husband's lawyer looked at her one last time, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of guilt and resignation. "Some battles," she whispered, "are never meant to be won." The courtroom grew silent, the weight of the words settling like dust in the air. The ex-wife's throat tightened. Will justice be served, or is revenge the only thing left? The question lingered, unanswered, as the room seemed to hold its breath. The final confrontation had only just begun, and the cost of knowing the truth was still yet to be paid. What you choose to remain silent about is often what will destroy you. The courtroom was empty now, the judge's gavel echoing through the silence. The aftermath of the trial hung heavy in the air, the dust of old wounds settling into the cracks they had tried so hard to seal. She sat alone in the witness box, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her body rigid, unwilling to release. The tension that had built up throughout the proceedings. The room felt cold, as if the weight of everything said, everything revealed, had leached the warmth from the space. Outside the windows, the city buzzed with life, unaware of the storm that had just raged inside these walls. But inside she could feel the reverberations of every truth that had been laid bare. The lawyer, the ex-husband, the lawyer's betrayal, it was all too much. The quiet, painful truth of the destruction that had been unleashed was now a part of her, a part of everything she had known, and it was impossible to escape. Her mind replayed the final moments of the trial, the accusations, the confessions, the rawness of the emotions that had been exposed. Every word had felt like a lash, each truth a wound that would never fully heal. She had come here hoping for closure, hoping for justice, but now she understood that the price of silence was far steeper than she had ever imagined. Her fingers curled into fists, and she glanced toward the door. She half expected him to walk through at her ex-husband, the man who had caused all of this. But he didn't come. The room remained empty, as if he had never existed, as if the whole trial had been nothing but a nightmare she had yet to wake from. The silence settled deeper, its weight pressing down on her chest. She had fought for so long to protect her child, to keep them safe from the fallout of this mess, but now she wasn't sure she had succeeded. She wasn't sure she had succeeded in anything. A shadow moved across the doorway, and she looked up. Startled, it was the lawyer, her once ally, now the very symbol of betrayal. She watched as the woman walked toward her, each step heavy, each movement deliberate. The lawyer stopped just a few feet away, her gaze avoiding the ex-wife's. She didn't sit, didn't speak. She simply stood there, the air between them thick, with unspoken words. "I never meant for it to be like this," the lawyer said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of a confession. "You have to believe me. This was never supposed to hurt you." The words felt like acid on her skin. Hurt her? The damage had already been done, and it had been done in silence. The lawyer had all along known about the inheritance, the secrets, the twisted web that had bound them all together. She had been complicit in it. She had been the one to hide the truth from her, the one who had stood by and watched as the lies unraveled everything. The ex-wife's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the witness box, forcing herself to stay still, to stay composed. "You could have told me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but there was a sharpness to it that cut through the quiet. "You could have told me the truth. All this time, all these years, I had no idea what was really happening." "What? You were really hiding from me?" The lawyer looked up then, her eyes flickering with something. Guilt? Fear? She couldn't tell. But there was something in the way the lawyer avoided her gaze, in the way she shifted uncomfortably on her feet, that made her heart ache. The woman wasn't just a betrayer. She was a person too, one who had made choices that had cost her something, even if she hadn't fully realized it at the time. "I thought I was protecting you," the lawyer said, her voice softening. "I thought I was doing the right thing. But in the end, I wasn't. I wasn't protecting anyone." For a moment, the ex-wife stood there, unsure of what to do with the weight of this new truth. The lawyer's words hung in the air, and for the first time, she saw the human being behind the role, the vulnerable woman who had made a mistake, who had been caught up in something bigger than she had realized. But there was no turning back now. The damage had already been done. The lies had been laid bare, the inheritance had been revealed, and her trust had been shattered beyond repair. Even now, as the lawyer spoke of protection and regret, the truth was undeniable. There was no redemption in this. There was no easy way out. The ex-wife turned away, her eyes focusing on the empty space in front of her, on the faint reflection of herself in the glass. She was tired, so tired of all of it. Tired of the lies, tired of the silence, tired of the pain that had been passed down from one generation to the next. But the one thing she had never expected, the one thing that had been buried so deep, was the price of it all. The inheritance had never been hers to claim. The lawyer's role had been part of the cost. Her ex-husband had known this all along. "I've spent so long trying to make sense of it," she said softly, almost to herself. "Trying to understand why things turned out this way, why he did this to me, to us." Her voice trailed off and she turned back to face the lawyer. "And now what? What am I supposed to do with this? With all this information? With everything I've lost?" The lawyer didn't answer immediately. She stood there, her eyes searching the ex-wife's face as if trying to find the words, as if searching for some way to make amends. The ex-wife didn't want her apology. She didn't want anything from her. She had asked for the truth, but now that she had it, it felt like too much to bear. "I can't fix this," the lawyer finally said, her voice heavy with regret. "I can't take back what I've done, but I am sorry." The ex-wife swallowed hard. The words were hollow. Too late. The silence between them stretched, a void that neither of them knew how to fill. The lawyer turned to leave, but the ex-wife called out to her, her voice sharp. "Will justice be served?" she asked, the question hanging in the air. "Or is revenge the only thing left?" The lawyer didn't answer. She simply walked away, her footsteps fading into the distance. The ex-wife stood there for a long time, her eyes fixed on the empty chair across from her. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but she knew now that the truth had come at a terrible cost. The pain, the betrayal, the years of silence, it had all led her here to this moment, where the only thing left to do was face the choices that had been made for her. And yet, even in the quiet aftermath, the question still lingered. Is the past ever truly forgiven? The room grew colder. She felt it, the weight of everything settling in her bones. But she wasn't sure if forgiveness was even possible anymore. The truth had set her free, but it had also bound her to a past that she wasn't sure she could escape. And as she stood there, alone in the silence, she realized that some battles could never be won. The smallest act of kindness can mend the deepest wound. The house was quiet now, the kind of silence that feels like a breath held too long. She stood in the kitchen, her back to the window, looking out at the empty street beyond. The same street where, not too long ago, her life had been spiraling out of control. The same street where she had walked every day, carrying a weight she thought she could never set down. She had made it through the trial. The words, the accusations, the betrayals, each one a strike, each one a wound. But now that the dust had settled, now that the chaos had stilled, she found herself alone with the aftermath, unsure of where to go from here. The courtroom had been the battlefield, but the real battle, her real fight, was only just beginning. The kettle whistled in the corner, breaking the silence. She didn't move at first, just let the sound fill the room, like a signal that time hadn't stopped, that life was still moving forward. She moved slowly, mechanically, as though each step took more effort than it should have. Her hands, still shaking from the tension of the past few weeks, reached for the teacup. She poured the hot water, watching the steam rise, her gaze unfocused. The warmth of the cup against her palm was a small comfort, a fleeting moment of peace. In a world that felt anything but peaceful. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to collect herself, trying to find some sense of stability in the midst of the wreckage. Her child's footsteps approached, light but steady. She didn't need to turn around to know they were there. She had heard them come down the stairs, had felt their presence like a pull at her heart. The door to the kitchen creaked open, and she felt a small, warm hand slip into hers. She didn't look down, but she squeezed it gently, feeling the soft pressure in return. "Mom?" The voice was quiet, tentative. Her child didn't speak often unless there was something on their mind, something heavy enough to make them question everything. She finally turned, her eyes meeting her child's, the innocence still there, the trust still unbroken, but there was something else now, something she couldn't ignore, the weight of what they had been through together, what they had both endured. They had been caught in the storm, and now, the pieces of that storm lay scattered at their feet. "You okay?" her child asked, voice barely above a whisper, as if testing the waters, unsure of how much they were allowed to know. She smiled, though. It felt foreign, like a mask that didn't quite fit. "I'm okay," she said, but the words felt hollow even as they left her mouth. She wasn't okay. Not really. But she had to pretend she was, for them, for both of them. Her child tugged at her sleeve, a small gesture, but one that made her heart ache. "I'm glad you're here," they said, their eyes searching hers for reassurance. The smallest act of kindness, a simple touch. A word. It was these small moments, these small gestures that kept her grounded. They reminded her that, despite everything that had happened, there was still something worth fighting for. She crouched down to their level, bringing them close. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know how they would move forward from here. But in this moment, she knew that she would protect them. No matter what. Her child pulled away slightly, looking up at her with the same vulnerability they always had. "Are you going to be okay?" they asked. "Are you going to be okay like before?" Her throat tightened, and she took a slow breath. She didn't know how to answer. The truth was, she didn't know if she would ever be okay like before the trial, before the secrets had been revealed, before the weight of the truth had settled in her chest. But maybe that was the point. Maybe there was no going back to how things were. Maybe the only way forward was to learn how to live with what had been broken, how to rebuild after everything had been torn down. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "But we'll figure it out together. Okay?" Her child nodded, their eyes filled with a kind of understanding she hadn't expected. They didn't know everything, not yet. They didn't understand the depths of the lies, the betrayals, the scars that had been left behind. But they knew enough to know that they weren't alone. They had each other. Her fingers brushed against the scar on her wrist, a reminder of another time, another chapter in her life. The scar had once been a symbol of everything she had endured, of everything she had fought through. But now it felt different. The scar, the past, it was still there, but it didn't define her anymore. She lifted her child's chin, meeting their gaze. "I'm sorry for all of this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm sorry for what you've had to see." Her child didn't say anything at first, just looked at her with those wide, trusting eyes. Then they smiled, a small, quiet smile that held more wisdom than she had ever expected to see in such a young face. "It's okay, Mom," they said softly. "I know you're trying your best." Her chest tightened as the weight of their words settled in. It was strange how a simple phrase could undo so much, how a child's kindness could feel like the balm for wounds she hadn't known how to heal. The room felt warmer now, not from the teacup in her hand, but from the comfort of being seen, of being understood. The stillness between them was no longer uncomfortable. It was a quiet kind of peace, a peace she hadn't known she needed until now. But the past still loomed, still whispered its secrets in the back of her mind. The scars remained, even if they had begun to fade. The truth had been revealed, but its cost was far more than she had anticipated. And as she looked at her child, she realized that the real work was just beginning. Can a broken heart ever truly heal? She asked quietly, almost to herself, her voice carrying the weight of the question. She didn't know the answer. She didn't think anyone really did, but as her child leaned in, their small hand resting on hers, she realized that maybe the healing wasn't about erasing the past. Maybe it was about finding the strength to move forward, together, with the pieces of the past still in hand, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Sometimes to move forward, you must first let go. The key sat on the table before her, an object, so simple in its design, yet so complex in the meaning it held. She could see the dents, the scratches, the marks left by years of being a symbol of betrayal, of confinement, of pain. Now, it lay there still, waiting for her to make a choice. Her hand hovered over it for a long moment. The weight of it in her mind far surpassed its weight in her hand. She had carried this key for so long, each day a reminder of the lies, the secrets, the broken trust. It had become a part of her, a part of the darkness that clung to her thoughts. That made her see the world through a lens of suspicion and hurt. She had held on to it, perhaps too tightly, not wanting to let go, afraid of what might happen if she did. The room was quiet, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second passing like a reminder that time was slipping away, whether she was ready to move forward or not. The weight of the past had a way of staying with you, even after the storm had passed, even after the truth had been revealed. The pieces were scattered, but they hadn't fully settled. She could still feel them, still see the cracks they had left behind. Her fingers brushed the key, the metal cold against her skin, and a memory flashed in her mind. The day she had first found it, when the world had seemed so different, so full of hope. She remembered how it had been placed in her hand so casually, as if it were nothing more than a token, a small object meant to unlock something simple. But it wasn't simple. It never had been. She closed her eyes, the memory of that moment now clouded with the weight of everything that had followed. She had trusted him with her heart, with her future, with their child. And in return, he had given her this key, this symbol of everything that had been kept from her. It wasn't just a key to a door. It was a key to a life she hadn't been allowed to see, a life filled with secrets, with betrayal, with lies that had left scars she couldn't erase. She opened her eyes, the key still in her hand, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt something shift inside her. The anger, the bitterness, the hurt, they were still there, of course, but they were fading, like a fog lifting, leaving something else behind. Something she hadn't expected, that forgiveness that she didn't know when it had happened, didn't know when the walls she had built around herself had started to crumble, but they had. And now, standing there, with the key in her hand, she realized something. She had been holding on to the past for so long, holding on to the anger and the pain, because she thought that if she let go, if she forgave, it would mean forgetting. But it didn't. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about release. She looked at the key, really looked at it for the first time in a long time. It was just a piece of metal, nothing more, nothing less. It didn't hold power over her anymore. It was only as powerful as she allowed it to be. The past had shaped her, yes, but it didn't have to define her. The sound of footsteps brought her back to the present. She turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was her child. Their small form was barely visible against the light spilling in from the hallway, but she saw the way their eyes searched hers, the way they seemed to ask without words if she was okay. She didn't know how to explain it to them. How could she? How could she put into words the storm that had raged inside her, the weight she had carried, the struggle to make sense of a past that had never been fully hers to understand? But in that moment, she realized that they didn't need her to explain it. They just needed her to be here, to be present, to show them that it was possible to move forward, together. Her child stepped into the room, their footsteps hesitant, but filled with the same quiet strength they had always shown. The teddy bear they had carried with them since they were small was tucked under their arm, worn and frayed, but still holding a place in their heart. "I'm sorry," they said, their voice small, vulnerable, "for everything, for not understanding, for all the mess." Her heart ached at their words, and she felt a tear slip down her cheek, though she didn't know when it had started. She wiped it away quickly, trying to smile, but her voice caught in her throat. "It's not your fault," she said softly. "None of this is your fault. We're going to be okay." Her child nodded, their small hand reaching up to touch her cheek, their fingers warm against her skin. The gesture, so simple, yet so full of love, was enough to bring her to the brink of breaking. In that moment, she understood what it meant to heal. It wasn't about fixing everything all at once. It was about the small acts, the quiet moments. The love that had always been there, even when the world had seemed too heavy to bear. She sat down, pulling her child into her arms, holding them close, feeling the warmth of their body against hers. The key, still resting on the table, felt like a distant memory now, a symbol of a time that was finally starting to fade into the past. "I think," she whispered, "that we can finally let it go." The words were almost impossible to say, but she said them anyway, because in that moment, she knew they were true. She had carried the past for so long, had let it define her, but now it was time to release it, to let it fall away like the weight of 1,000 stones. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. Her child nestled closer, their warmth grounding her in the present, in the only moment that mattered now. But the question still lingered, haunting and unfinished, like a note that didn't quite resolve. What happens when forgiveness is the hardest thing to do? She didn't have an answer, not yet. But as she held her child, as she felt the weight of the past slowly lift, she realized something. Maybe forgiveness wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning. And with that thought, she closed her eyes, the silence of the room wrapping around them like a soft protective blanket. The key to letting go, she realized, wasn't in the past. It was in the present, in the love they shared, and in the small, quiet moments that made everything worth it. The room grew still, and the final echo of that thought lingered in the air. Can a broken heart ever truly heal? She asked quietly. But there was no need for an answer. The healing had already begun. The past is a story we can never rewrite, but the future is ours to create. She stood in front of the window, her hands resting lightly on the sill, watching the world outside as it unfolded with a quiet rhythm. The sky had cleared, the clouds drifting away to reveal a stretch of blue that seemed too vast, too wide for the weight she still carried inside. It was almost too much light, too much space, too much hope. But as she looked out, she felt something shift, a moment of clarity. The past had shaped her, yes, but it no longer defined her. The present was hers to claim. The air smelled different now, like rain on concrete, like fresh beginnings. A light breeze carried the scent of new growth, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting it wash over her. She could almost believe that everything was about to change, almost. She turned away from the window, her steps slow, measured, as if she were walking through a world she was still learning to trust. Each movement felt deliberate, like she was rediscovering her body, her space, her life. The scar on her wrist, once a painful reminder of what had been, seemed less sharp now, as though time had begun to smooth the edges of it. She no longer felt its weight as she once had, a constant presence that tugged at her. Now it was simply a part of her, like the lines on her hands etched into her, yes, but not in a way that threatened to undo her. She reached for the envelope on the kitchen counter, her fingers brushing the corner of the paper. It was an old letter, a letter from the past, something she had never opened until now. She had kept it hidden away, tucked in the back of a drawer, for years. She had always told herself she would read it someday, but the days kept slipping by, each one adding more layers of distance between her and that version of herself. The version who had been betrayed, who had been wronged, who had been lost. She held the letter in her hands for a long time, the weight of it a strange comfort. It was a piece of history she could no longer outrun, no matter how much she had tried to forget. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, the familiar curves of his letters. He had written it years ago, before everything had fallen apart, before the secrets, before the betrayal. She tore the envelope open with a deep, steady breath, as though preparing herself for what was to come. Inside was the letter, its edges yellowed with time, the words faded but still legible. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the familiar words. The letter was an apology. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything that had come before. He spoke of his regrets, of his mistakes, of the things he should have said, of the things he wished he had done differently. He apologized for the pain he had caused, for the way he had left her, for the secrets he had kept from her. He spoke of his love for her, the love he had never truly expressed, the love he had hidden behind walls of pride and fear. She let the words settle, each one a shard of glass cutting through the walls she had built around herself. The pain of reading them was sharp, but it was also something else, a release, a quiet surrender. She had always thought she needed him to apologize, to offer her something more than just the silence he had left her with. But now, as she read his words, she realized something. The apology, as much as it mattered, was never going to be enough. It would never change what had been done. It would never erase the scars. But it was a step in the right direction. A step toward healing. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the letter down, the weight of the words still heavy in her chest. She had spent so long holding on to her anger, holding on to the belief that forgiveness would somehow make everything right. But now she knew that forgiveness wasn't about him. It wasn't about what he had done. It was about her, about freeing herself from the chains of the past. She stood up, the letter still lying on the counter, and walked to the window again. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm glow over the city, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. The light felt different now, softer, as though the world had been washed clean. The future felt like a blank page waiting to be written. Her child walked into the room then, their small hands tucked into the pockets of their jeans, their face uncertain, their eyes searching hers. The moment stretched out between them, a quiet pause that held more weight than any words could. "Mom?" the child asked softly, their voice a quiet thread in the room. "Are we okay now?" She turned to face them, her heart heavy but steady. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't have a roadmap to lead them through the future. But in this moment, in this quiet space between them, she realized that they had made it. They had survived the storm, and now it was time to rebuild. "We're okay," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We're going to be okay." The words didn't fix everything. They didn't erase the years of hurt, the weight of the past. But they were enough. They were a promise, a quiet commitment to the future. Her child's face softened, a small smile pulling at the corners of their lips. They walked over to her, their arms opening wide, and she embraced them, holding them tightly, feeling the warmth of their body against hers. This was what mattered now. This moment. This love. She pulled away gently, her hands resting on their shoulders, looking down at them with a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "We'll figure it out," she said, her voice steady now. "Together." The key sat on the table, its presence still there, but now it felt different. It wasn't a symbol of betrayal anymore. It was a symbol of release, of freedom. She could feel the weight of it lifting, slowly but surely. The future was theirs to shape now, theirs to build. From the ground up. The past had its place, but it no longer had a hold on them. The chains had broken. Her child's hand reached for hers, their fingers curling around hers like they always had. She squeezed their hand gently, and in that moment, she knew something profound. It wasn't the apologies, the broken promises, or even the healing that had to come. It was the choice to move forward, to build something new, to create a future that wasn't defined by the shadows of the past. "What happens when you finally get the chance to choose your own path?" she asked softly, more to herself than to anyone else. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the answer deep inside her. The future was hers to create. And for the first time, it felt like she was finally free to begin. The shadows of the past linger, but they no longer define us. The room was quieter now, the sound of her own breath louder than it had ever been. She sat by the window, the soft glow of early evening streaming in, casting long shadows across the room. Outside, the world seemed almost too bright, too full of life. The trees were thick with green, the flowers in full bloom, and the air smelled of spring, the kind of fresh air that invited new beginnings. And yet, even in the brightness of the present, the past lingered like an echo, a reminder of everything she had come through. The key sat in the drawer beside her, forgotten for the most part. It had been years since she had thought about it, years since it had symbolized anything but the remnants of a life that no longer held power over her. The key, once a representation of betrayal, a symbol of a future stolen from her, was now nothing more than a relic of the past. She reached for it, her fingers grazing the smooth metal. It felt different now, its weight no longer oppressive, but almost insignificant. She ran her thumb along the edges, the familiar groove still there, worn from years of use. She had never asked for this key, never asked for the secrets that had come with it, but here it was, a small object that had played such a large role in shaping her life. And now it was simply a reminder that the past couldn't be changed, only carried forward in the small ways that mattered. The drawer slid shut with a soft thud, the sound barely noticeable against the backdrop of the still room. She leaned back in her chair, eyes wandering to the picture on the mantel. It was a recent one, her child, no longer the small person they had once been. They were growing up, stretching into a life she could never have imagined for them. Their future was theirs to shape, and the weight of her own past would never be their burden. She closed her eyes for a moment, the rush of memories sweeping through her. The courtroom, the lawyer's eyes, the words of betrayal, the finality of the judgment. It had all come crashing down so quickly, so loudly. The anger, the pain, the regret, it had all been so overwhelming, each wave threatening to pull her under. But she had survived. She had fought her way through the chaos, step by step, and here she was, 10 years later, sitting in a room filled with light and the quiet hum of peace. Her child's voice broke through her thoughts, soft and questioning. "Mom?" they asked, standing in the doorway. The years had changed them, but their eyes still held the same innocence, the same trust. They were older now, more aware, but there was still something in their gaze that anchored her to the present, something that reminded her of the moments they had shared, the life they had built together. She smiled, a smile that felt more genuine now than it had in a long time. "Hey," she said, her voice warm with the comfort of time past. "How was your day?" Her child shrugged, a look of uncertainty crossing their face. They had always been perceptive, always able to sense the things left unsaid. "Are you okay?" they asked. The question, so simple, cut through her like a knife. Of course she was okay. She was alive, wasn't she? She had made it through the storm, and now the sun was finally shining. But she couldn't help the small flicker of doubt that rose inside her. Was she really okay? Could she ever be truly okay again? The scars remained, the memories of everything that had happened, everything she had lost. But then, maybe that was the price of survival. Maybe the only way to move forward was to carry the weight and still choose to walk. "I'm okay," she replied, the words firm but soft, like a promise to both herself and her child. "I'm better than okay." Her child's face softened, as if accepting the unspoken understanding between them. They walked over and sat beside her, their small hand resting gently on her arm. In that simple gesture, she felt the weight of the years they had shared, the bond that had formed despite everything. Her child had been through so much, more than anyone should have to face. But they were stronger than she had ever known, and they were a part of her, a part of the future she had always dreamed of for them. "Can we go for a walk?" her child asked, a small smile tugging at their lips. "It's been a while since we've done that." The request was simple, but in it, she saw something more, something that had been missing for too long. It wasn't just a walk. It was a step forward, a step into the future they were building together. The weight of the past would always be there, but it didn't have to dictate their every move. She stood up, the room feeling lighter now, the air filled with the promise of new beginnings. "I'd like that," she said, her voice steady. "Let's go." They walked side by side, the sunlight casting long shadows across the path in front of them. It felt like a new chapter, the kind that had been waiting for them both, even if they hadn't known how to begin it. The world seemed bigger now, more open, and she could feel the weight of the past lifting. Bit by bit, as she moved forward, her child talked about their day, the little things, the people they had seen, The things they had learned, the small triumphs that meant the world to them. Her heart swelled with a mixture of pride and relief. They were moving forward. They were growing, changing, becoming who they were meant to be. And as they walked, the key sitting quietly in the drawer felt like a distant memory, a symbol of everything she had left behind. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about this moment. It was about choosing to create a future, one step at a time, with the person who mattered most. They walked together, the path ahead stretching out before them, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was walking in the light. The shadows no longer defined her. They no longer defined them. What happens when you finally get the chance to choose your own path? She thought quietly to herself, but this time, the question didn't hang in the air like a threat. It was a promise. And for the first time, she knew the answer. The past had shaped her, yes, but it was the future, the one she was walking toward, that would define who she was and who they would be. Suspect gets flattened like an NFL player while fleeing police. This suspect thought he could outrun the cops until one officer leveled him like a pro linebacker. Takedown of the year? You decide that cop's got a future in the NFL or what?